From the moment he was old enough to look up at the sky, his gaze had been fixed on the stars. On Earth, in the great city beneath the shadow of the orbital shipyards, most children saw the heavens as ordinary, familiar lights twinkling in the distance, ships gliding across the night like moving constellations. But for Ethan, the stars were alive. They whispered promises of adventure, of discovery, of something far beyond the reach of the crowded world he knew. His parents, both engineers, worked tirelessly to maintain the orbital stations that floated high above Earth's atmosphere. They were practical people, grounded by necessity, too busy with equations and repairs to indulge in fantasies. Ethan, however, was different. He would spend hours lying on the roof of their habitation block, staring at the distant galaxies through a battered telescope he had salvaged from a scrapyard. Each night, his imagination carried him away. He was an explorer, a wanderer, a traveler who left footprints where no one else had dared to tread. But dreams had a way of turning into restlessness. By 16, Ethan's yearning for the stars had become unbearable. He was clever, resourceful, and stubborn to a fault, traits that often landed him in trouble. That trouble came to a peak one evening when he discovered that a survey shuttle was preparing to depart from the orbital docks. Its mission was routine, destined for the Liari system on the edge of human-colonized space, where negotiations with the native species were ongoing. To most, it was a minor diplomatic errand. To Ethan, it was opportunity. Slipping aboard the shuttle was dangerous and foolish. Security was strict, but Ethan had long since learned how to blend into the crowds. Of dock workers, he found his way into a storage compartment, heart hammering with equal parts fear and exhilaration. As the shuttle's engines roared to life and Earth shrank below him, Ethan felt a rush that no words could describe. For the first time in his life, he was leaving his world behind. The boy who had stared at the stars was now among them. The journey was long, but to Ethan, it passed in a blur of wonder. He gazed out of small observation windows whenever he could, marveling at the way starlight scattered against the ship's hull, at the endless void that seemed both terrifying and beautiful. When the shuttle finally reached the Liari homeworld, Ethan could hardly believe what he saw. The planet was a jewel, oceans glimmering like liquid sapphire, continents shaped in flowing patterns of green and silver forests, skies painted with twin moons that bathed the land in pale light. Humans had only recently begun diplomatic contact with the Liari, a species spoken of with equal parts admiration and caution. They were known for their elegance, their restraint, their culture steeped in traditions as old as the stars themselves. To the human settlers who had met them, the Liari seemed otherworldly, aloof, yet dignified. It was on the second-day planetside, wandering too far from the designated human quarter, that Ethan first saw her. She stood by a river of crystalline water that reflected the light of both moons, her tall frame poised with quiet grace. Her skin shimmered faintly, as though lit from within by some hidden starlight, and her hair flowed like strands of silver touched by a breeze. But it was her eyes that held Ethan still. They shifted in color like the swirling hues of a nebula, reflecting not only light but also emotion, curiosity, surprise, and something softer he couldn't name. Her name, he would learn later, was Sarai. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. She was unlike anything Ethan had imagined in all his nights of dreaming, more real and vivid than any starship or far-off galaxy. And though she should have regarded him with suspicion, as her people often did toward humans, she didn't. She looked at him as though he were something new, something unexpected. Sarai had always known her place in the universe. As the daughter of a Liari counselor, her life was guided by tradition, duty, and expectation. From a young age, she was taught that every gesture, every word, every glance carried meaning. The Liari were a people of balance and restraint, a species that believed harmony was fragile and easily broken. To them, humans were a disruption, a species born of a violent world, brimming with fire and willpower. Her father, Counselor Thalen, often said, "Humans burn too brightly. They do not know how to temper themselves. They create beauty, yes, but also chaos. Keep your distance, child, for their fire will consume you if you linger too close." Sarai had believed him, until the boy. The first time she spoke to Ethan, it was out of curiosity. She had seen him wandering near the river, his movements clumsy compared to the fluid grace of her people, yet filled with an energy that drew her in. When their eyes met, she expected the usual awkward silence of interspecies encounters. Instead, he smiled, unguarded, warm, as though meeting her was the most natural thing in the world. And then came the questions. Humans were always inquisitive, but Ethan's questions were different. They were not about politics, trade agreements, or Liari customs. They were about her. "Why do your people sing when the moons rise?" he asked one evening when she caught him watching from a distance. She should have walked away, but something in his tone, gentle, genuinely curious, made her answer. She explained that the Liari sang to honor the memory of their ancestors, who believed the moons were windows into the eternal. Another time, he pointed to her eyes, tilting his head as, though studying a riddle, "The colors change when you're happy. Is it always like that?" She laughed at his boldness. No Liari would have dared to ask something so personal. But she told him the truth, that their eyes were living reflections of their emotions, impossible to hide, a reminder that honesty was not just virtue, but nature itself. As the days passed, their conversations grew longer. Ethan would ask about the stars as though each one were a mystery waiting to be unlocked, and Sarai found herself answering, even when she had no reason to. Then she began asking questions of her own. "What is firelight like? My people have no flame, no need for it. But humans speak of it as though it were alive." He told her of Earth's campfires, of warmth and laughter around flickering light, of stories shared beneath smoke-streaked skies. His words painted pictures she could almost feel. And for the first time in her life, Sarai longed for something beyond Liari tradition. She began to notice small things about him, the way his eyes lit when he spoke of his dreams, the way his laughter echoed like a melody against the river's surface, the way he never treated her as distant or untouchable. To Ethan, she was not a counselor's daughter, not a symbol of her people. She was simply Sarai. But with that realization came a shadow of fear. She knew the rules. A bond between a Liari and a human was forbidden, not by law, but by custom, far older than her birth. Such unions were seen as dangerous, a merging of fire and water that could only end in ruin. Already, her father's warnings echoed in her mind. "You risk too much," Thalen told her one evening, his voice sharp as crystal. "I have seen the way the human boy looks at you. Do not mistake curiosity for something deeper. Their kind cannot be bound. They chase, they burn, and they leave ashes behind. Keep your heart guarded, Sarai." She bowed her head, outwardly obedient, but her thoughts betrayed her. For in her heart, she knew Ethan was different. He did not chase her with reckless desire. He listened, he learned, he cared in a way that felt startlingly sincere. That night, by the river, she told him of her father's warning. Ethan only shrugged, a half-smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe your father's right. Maybe I don't know how to temper myself. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe it means I'll fight for something worth keeping." His words unsettled her more than any warning, because part of her wanted to believe them. Sarai's dilemma deepened with every meeting. The traditions of her people tugged her one way, her heart pulled her another. She knew the path of duty, silence, distance, obedience. But when she looked at Ethan, Standing awkwardly yet confidently beneath the twin moons, she wondered if perhaps the stars had woven something different for her, something neither Lyari nor human, but something new entirely. And so, despite her father's warnings, despite her own fear, she chose to keep meeting him. Each time she promised herself it would be the last. Each time when she saw his smile, she broke that promise. What Sarai did not yet realize was that her choice would not only change her life, it would ripple outward, reshaping the destiny of both their peoples. Secrets, Sarai soon realized, were fragile things. What had begun as quiet meetings by the riverside could not remain hidden forever. Whispers traveled quickly among the Lyari, carried by servants, guards, and watchful eyes that noticed too much. A Lyari daughter laughing in the company of a human boy was not a sight easily ignored. The Lyari prided themselves on balance, on careful separation of roles and duties. They welcomed humans into their cities, yes, but only as guests, traders, or allies. To allow a human to step across that invisible threshold into something personal, something intimate, was unthinkable. The rumors reached Counselor Thalen first. Sarai's father summoned her into the great chamber of their home, where walls of living crystal glowed softly with moonlight. He stood tall, his expression as unyielding as carved stone. "You dishonor our family," he said without preamble, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "You risk not only your reputation but the fragile peace we have built with these outsiders. Do you understand what your selfishness could cost?" Sarai kept her gaze lowered, though her heart thundered in her chest. "I did not mean to—" Her father's hand cut the air sharply. "Do not insult me with excuses. You have been seen. A counselor's daughter consorting with a human boy as though he were your equal. Do you know what message that sends? They are not us, Sarai. They cannot be us." The words struck like cold steel. She wanted to protest, to tell him that Ethan was not reckless or crude, as the elders claimed, that he asked questions no one else asked, that he made her feel seen in, a way she had never known. But she said nothing. To speak would be to defy him openly, and the Lyari did not forgive defiance easily. Ethan, meanwhile, faced his own confrontation. The human envoy, a stern diplomat named Carver, pulled him aside with a glare that could have cut through stone. "You realize what you've done?" Carver demanded, his voice low and furious. "We are here to build trust, to secure trade and peace, not to fuel the Lyari's suspicions about our lack of restraint. You've jeopardized months of work by chasing a childish infatuation." Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. "It's not infatuation," he said, the words tight with anger. "You talk about peace, but if two people talking by a river can threaten it, then maybe it's not peace at all. Maybe it's just fear dressed up as diplomacy." Carver stared at him, taken aback, but said nothing more. Ethan walked away, chest burning, the echo of his words still ringing in his ears. For a time, both Ethan and Sarai tried to obey. Guards watched her more closely. Humans were discouraged from wandering beyond their designated quarters. The river that had been their sanctuary became a forbidden place. Nights passed in silence, heavy with longing, as each wondered if the other was thinking the same thoughts, feeling the same ache. But love, once kindled, does not yield easily to rules. One evening, Ethan slipped past the human watch, heart hammering, as he crept toward the river. He half expected her not to be there, that she had chosen duty over him, as everyone demanded she should. Yet when he stepped into the moonlit clearing, Sarai was already waiting. For a moment, they said nothing. The air between them was heavy with unspoken truths, with the knowledge of the risks they carried simply by standing there. "You shouldn't have come," Sarai whispered, though her eyes betrayed the relief flooding her heart. "You shouldn't have either," Ethan replied softly. Then, after a pause, he added, But I'm glad you did. They sat together by the water, their hands brushing once, twice, before finally settling into each other's grasp. The touch was electric, fragile, and defiant all at once. In that simple act, they declared a truth neither council nor envoy could erase. They had chosen each other, even if the world condemned it. Sarai leaned against him, her voice quiet. My father says our bond can only end in tragedy. That humans and Lyari are too different, too dangerous together. Ethan looked at her, his jaw set with quiet determination. Maybe he's right. Maybe it will end in tragedy. But I'd rather face that than never know what this could be. Her eyes shimmered with shifting hues, fear, hope, longing, all at once. And in that moment, she realized that what they shared was no fleeting spark. It was something deeper, something worth the risk. The river flowed silently beside them, carrying their reflections away beneath the moons. The universe beyond remained vast and unyielding, but here, in this forbidden corner of the world, two hearts beat in defiance of all the rules that sought to keep them apart. The invaders were the Veyrak, a warlike species known across the fringes of the galaxy for their ruthless expansion. Where the Lyari sought harmony, the Veyrak thrived on conquest. They had waited, watched, and chosen their moment well. The Lyari Council, distracted by rising unrest over the human presence and whispers of scandal surrounding Sarai and Ethan, had grown complacent. Their defenses were prepared for ceremony, not war. The skies above the Lyari capital ignited as Veyrak. Warships tore through the atmosphere, great spires of crystal shattered beneath the bombardment. Cities built over centuries trembled as if the very ground itself had turned against them. Sarai stood on the balcony of her family's chamber as the first explosions echoed across the horizon. Her heart seized, not just with fear for her people, but for Ethan. Was he safe? Was he trapped in the human quarter where chaos now reigned as alarms wailed and soldiers scrambled? Her father's voice cut through the noise. To the shelters, Sarai! Now! But Sarai shook her head, gripping the railing, her nebula-hued eyes wide. The humans will fight, she whispered. They always fight. Indeed, even as Lyari. Defenders hesitated. Human ships rose from the orbital docks. They were fewer in number, smaller than the massive Veyrak cruisers, but they moved with reckless daring. Where Lyari strategy emphasized patience, the humans struck fast and hard, their weapons blazing like fire across the darkened sky. Ethan, meanwhile, found himself among a crowd of terrified colonists as soldiers rushed past. The envoy, Carver, barked orders, trying to corral the humans into safety. But Ethan's gaze was fixed on the city beyond, where Sarai lived. He could not stand idly by while she faced the storm. When a squad of Lyari guards fell back under enemy fire near the quarter's edge, Ethan seized his chance. Grabbing a fallen rifle, heavy and alien in his hands, he stumbled forward into the chaos. He had no training, no plan, only a desperate will to reach her. The Lyari defenders who saw him expected him to falter, to cower as many of their own civilians did. But instead, Ethan stood his ground. He fired wildly, clumsily, but with a ferocity that startled even the seasoned soldiers beside him. Each time they fell back, he pushed forward, shouting in a voice that carried above the thunder, "We can't! Give them an inch!" It was madness, but it was the kind of madness that rallied hearts. Lyari soldiers who had been wavering began to fight with renewed strength. They looked at the boy, this fragile human from a death world, and saw in him a fire that would not bend. Elsewhere, Sarai faced her own battle. The council chamber had descended into chaos. Some elders cried that the humans were to blame, that their presence had weakened Lyari vigilance. Others demanded retreat, evacuation, surrender. Sarai stepped forward, her voice rising above the din. Do you not see? The humans fight for us while we argue. If we fall, It will not be because of their presence. It will be because of our fear." The elders turned on her, aghast. A counselor's daughter should have stayed silent. But Sarai pressed on, her voice unwavering. "I will not denounce him. I will not denounce them. They are not our downfall. They are our salvation for a moment." Silence hung heavy in the chamber. Then, as another explosion rocked the city, her father closed his eyes. When he opened them, his gaze was filled not with anger, but with weary resignation. "Then go," he said softly. "If you believe in them so much, stand with them. Prove that your love is more than recklessness." She did not hesitate. Cloaked in moonlight and fear, Sarai ran toward the battle. She found Ethan amid the smoke. And fire, his face streaked with grime, his hands trembling as he clutched the alien rifle. Relief flooded her as their eyes met, but there was no time for words. Side by side they fought, clumsy boy and counselor's daughter, against an enemy that outmatched them both. It was not skill that turned the tide. It was the sight of them, together, refusing to yield. Humans and Liari alike, inspired by their defiance, rallied. Ships burned in the sky, streets shook with fire, but slowly, painfully, the Veyrak advance faltered. The battle would rage for days, but in that first night, something shifted. The Liari no longer fought alone. They fought with humans, not as cautious allies, but as true partners. And at the heart of it all were a boy and a girl, bound not by politics, not by strategy, but by a love strong enough to defy even war. The war ended not with a single decisive battle, but with the steady, stubborn resistance of two peoples who had once doubted each other. For weeks, the skies of Liara burned. Human ships and Liari crystal warcraft fought side by side, filling the heavens with fire. On the ground, soldiers from both species bled together, holding the line against Veyrak forces that seemed endless. And yet, the endless tide broke. The Veyrak, who had believed the Liari too soft and the humans too few, faltered against the combined strength of unity. Slowly, grudgingly, they retreated back into the void. When the final Veyrak warship vanished into hyperspace, silence fell across the battered planet. The Liari cities lay scarred, their crystalline spires cracked and blackened. Human vessels floated in orbit, many crippled, their crews exhausted. But the world still stood. Liara had not fallen, and in the aftermath, it was not the generals or diplomats who were remembered first. It was the sight of a human boy and an alien girl, standing side by side in the smoke and rubble, refusing to abandon each other. The Council of Liara convened weeks later in the Great Chamber, its once shining walls still fractured from the bombardment. The atmosphere was heavy with grief, but also with something new, something like hope. Humans sat among the Liari elders now, no longer kept at the edges but welcomed into the circle. At the center stood Sarai and Ethan. They had not sought this position. They would have preferred the quiet of the river where they first met. But fate had placed them in the spotlight. They were no longer just two reckless youths. They had become symbols. An elder rose, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "We feared that love between our peoples would bring ruin. We feared it. Would divide us, weaken us, destroy us." Her gaze swept the chamber, then rested on the pair. "But what we saw was the opposite. Where we wavered, you stood firm. Where we doubted, you believed. You reminded us that unity is not built on fear, but on trust." Ethan shifted uncomfortably, under the attention. He was still just a boy from Earth, not a diplomat, not a soldier by training. But he met Sarai's eyes, and in them he found courage. Sarai spoke, her voice steady though her hands trembled. "I will not apologize for loving him. I cannot, for what we shared did not weaken us. It saved us. If we had listened to fear, if we had torn ourselves apart, the Veyrak would have claimed our world. Love is not the enemy of peace. Fear is. The chamber fell silent. For long moments, the elders considered her words, weighed them against tradition and history. Finally, her father, Counselor Thallon, rose. His face was weary, marked by the trials of war, but his eyes no longer held anger. "Perhaps I was wrong," he said slowly. "Perhaps it was never love we should have feared, but our unwillingness to accept it. My daughter has shown me what I could not see. This human boy has shown us all." The decision that followed was unprecedented. For the first time in Layari history, a bond between species was not only tolerated, but celebrated. The councils of both humanity and Lyara agreed to formalize an alliance, not out of convenience or necessity, but out of something far deeper. In the years that followed, the story of Ethan and Sarai spread across the stars. Songs were sung of the Lyari girl with nebula eyes and the human boy who defied the universe to stand beside her. Children of both species listened in wonder, their imaginations fired by the tale of forbidden love that became the spark of unity. Their names became legend etched into the histories of two civilizations. Where once humans were seen as reckless fire and Lyari as fragile crystal, together they were something new, something unbreakable. And for Ethan and Sarai themselves, their lives were not easy. They faced criticism, doubt, and the heavy weight of being symbols when they had only wanted to be themselves. But through it all, they held on to each other. In quiet moments, they returned to the river where it had all begun, watching the twin moons rise above the water, hand in hand. One evening, as they sat together, Ethan whispered the words he had spoken long ago when their journey had just begun. "The stars don't feel so far away anymore." Sarai leaned against him, her eyes shimmering with colors that spoke of love and peace. "That is because we brought them closer," she murmured. "Together."